From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. In the U.S., Ramadan starts at sundown on Friday, April 1st. White House says Putin being misled by advisors on Ukraine. Amnesty says unfair distribution of vaccine costs African lives. UN Refugee Agency raises refugee Zakat funds. Biden won't release Afghanistan's assets, even with collapse. University of Michigan adds professorship in South Asian art. Our top story tonight. Ramadan, Islam's holiest month, begins the evening of Friday, April 1st in the United States for most Muslims. During the month, Muslims observe daily fasting from dawn to sunset, abstaining from food, drink, and sex. Ramadan Mubarak is the greeting Muslims use to welcome Ramadan. It is the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar. In addition to fasting, it's marked by prayer, reflection, and charity. Muslims believe that the first verses of Islam's holy book, the Quran, were revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, during Ramadan. In Chicago, Loyola University's Muslim Chaplain is working with its dining halls to implement meal accommodations for Muslim students during Ramadan, starting April 2nd. Many Muslim students observe daily fasting from dawn to sunset during the month and perform extended nightly prayers. Loyola's Muslim chaplain, Omar Muzaffar, called Ramadan the annual Muslim boot camp. Muzaffar worked with Aramark, Loyola's dining hall food provider, to make meal packages available for fasting Muslim students after sunset. It is the first time since the pandemic that Loyola classes will be in full swing during Ramadan. The month is expected to end on May 2nd with the celebration of the holiday, Eid ul-Fitr. Tornadoes that ravaged Kentucky in December killed many Bowling Green community members and destroyed numerous homes and businesses. After the storms, Imam Muammar Siljevic of the Bosnian Islamic Center of Bowling Green received many calls from city residents seeking assistance. The Bosnian Islamic Center and the Islamic Center of Bowling Green joined forces, forming a group of volunteers to help all of those in need. The Bosnian Islamic Center formed a tornado relief board gathering information on survivors who had suffered from the disaster. Affected residents were asked to fill out an application to receive aid. And Ohio Muslim students' activism has led to the passage of a state law allowing athletes in hijab to compete in sports. Noor Alexandria Abu Karam decided to fight to change the rules after being disqualified in 2019 during a cross-country state meet for wearing a hijab. The 18-year-old athlete's campaign, Let Noor Run, garnered national attention and messages of support. Her mission to get Senate Bill 181 passed was supported by Muslim, Jewish, and Christian advocacy and community groups, as well as the American Civil Liberties Union. Governor Michael DeWine signed SB 181 into law last month after it had been passed unanimously through both State House and Senate. The legislation protects the religious expression rights of student athletes and those who engage in other extracurricular activities. The University of Michigan is adding a professorship in South Asian art and launching a collaboration with the South Asian Institute in Chicago. The new position in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts Department of History of Art is made possible by a gift from Drs. Shireen and Afzal Ahmed. The $2.75 million endowment to the Shireen and Afzal Ahmed Professorship in South Asian Arts will foster the next generation of scholars, curators, conservators, and critics. College Dean Anne Curzan said the endowed professorships are a hallmark of academic quality and a means by which a university honors its most esteemed faculty. The Ahmeds, who are physicians and philanthropists in Chicago, founded the South Asia Institute. On Wednesday, the White House said Russian President Vladimir Putin is being misinformed by his military leadership on Ukraine. The assessment came after a report citing U.S. intelligence officials' belief that Putin is being misled by advisors about how Russian forces are performing in Ukraine. United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson said Western nations should not lift sanctions on Moscow until all Russian troops leave. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has promised to fight for every meter of Ukrainian territory. More than 4 million people have fled the country in Russia's offensive, UN figures show. Peace talks between Moscow and Kiev are set to resume online on Friday. Former U.S. President Donald Trump is once again calling on Russian President Vladimir Putin to help find dirt on his political opponents. Trump told the right-wing Real America Voice that Putin should release any information he has on Hunter Biden, son of President Joe Biden. Trump sought information on Hunter Biden's international business dealings with Russian oligarch Yelena Botorina, former wife of the mayor of Moscow. In 2016, Trump publicly encouraged Russia to release any email hacked from then Democratic rival Hillary Clinton's private server used for official business. Donald Trump Jr., Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and disgraced former Trump campaign chairperson Paul Manafort also met with a Russian agent promising dirt on Clinton. On Wednesday, an international aid group warned that Afghanistan is on the brink of collapse as millions face poverty and starvation. The International Rescue Committee said that the refusal of the Biden administration and European governments to release Afghanistan's central bank reserves is depriving its economy of critical funds. It noted that the country is now the world's largest humanitarian appeal, requiring a staggering $4.47 billion in aid. That's 4 times what was needed at the start of 2021 and more than is required for Syria or Yemen, the group said. Since the Taliban recaptured power last August, ending 2 decades of US-led warfare and American troop withdrawal, the Biden administration froze billions of dollars in Afghan assets held in the US. Bringing you more news stories after the break. Stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Friends, our world is pulling together like never before. We're making huge sacrifices to keep one another safe. Scientists are working non-stop to develop COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A vaccine will get our economies moving. It will tell our loved ones we're safe again. But we have challenges we must address. Right now, huge pharmaceutical companies are keeping the vaccine research a secret. They're deciding how many vaccines get made, how much to charge for them, and who gets vaccinated. This will no doubt leave billions of people behind. Pharma companies are putting profit, not people, first. Yet, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is funding their work. We cannot let the CEOs of a handful of pharmaceutical companies decide our future. We need a vaccine that everyone can have free of charge, no matter where you live or whether you're rich or you're poor. We need companies to share all their research so we can make enough safe vaccines for everyone. We need a vaccine owned by all of us. To end this COVID-19 pandemic, we need to pull together once more.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September. I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table. I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. Indian media professionals have appealed to institutions to uphold their constitutional mandate amid open calls for attacks on religious minorities, especially Muslims. In an open letter, they wrote, "The concentrated amplification of hatred has been growing over the past years and months. Some groups have advocated violence during elections, political gatherings, and even controversy over clothing or the screening of a movie. These widely reported calls for violence have been met with silence from the nation's top leaders," they wrote. As well, they said systematic hate was also propagated against Muslims under the pretext of COVID-19, including calls by legislators for their socio-economic boycott. 80% of Arizona's Middle East Studies Association members endorsed a resolution calling for an academic boycott of Israeli institutions without singling out students or scholars. The resolution passed 768 to 167 at the 2021 members' meeting last Wednesday. There were 957 total ballots cast. Out of the over 2,000 eligible full members with voting privileges, 45% voted. That makes it the highest turnout in a Mesa election on record. Individual Mesa members can choose whether or not they wish to participate in an academic boycott. The move targets Israeli institutions for complicity in Israel's violation of human rights and international law by providing direct assistance to its military and intelligence agencies. A mosque in Manchester, United Kingdom has rejected accusation that it turned a blind eye to extremism. The allegations were made at a public inquiry into a 2017 bombing at a music venue in the city. The Manchester Islamic Centre called for further scrutiny of possible UK intelligence agencies' links to the bomber's family. Mosque leaders said that the bombing was fallout from a British government policy of supporting rebel groups trying to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi during the 2011 uprising in Libya. Gaddafi's government encouraged some Manchester Libyans to go fight in Libya. 22 people were killed and hundreds injured in an attack by a British Libyan on crowds leaving a concert at the Manchester Arena in May 2017. Salman Abdi, 22, blew himself up in the bombing later claimed by Daesh. Amnesty International has issued a report on the failure of the global drug companies and Western governments to quickly provide COVID vaccines to millions of Africans. Tens of thousands of deaths could have been prevented if companies put people before profits and governments were less nationalistic, the group's annual report says. It adds that Africa was discriminated against by wealthy nations and international corporations. Sarah Jackson, Amnesty's Deputy Regional Director for East Africa, says African countries were amongst the last to get the vaccines. African governments have struggled to purchase vaccines in the global market due to high demand and scarcity. Some African leaders accuse wealthy nations of hoarding vaccines. The UN Refugee Agency has released its Islamic Philanthropy Annual Report, showcasing the impact of Zakat and Sadaqah donations on refugees and internally displaced people. In 2021, the UNHCR's Refugee Zakat Fund provided life-saving aid through cash and in-kind assistance to more than 1.2 million refugees and internally displaced people. Aid recipients were from 14 countries, including Yemen, Syria, Mauritania, Afghanistan, and India. The fund also received fatwas of endorsement from respected Islamic institutions. Those included the Muslim World League's Islamic Fiqh Council, Al-Azhar Islamic Research Academy, and the International Sharia Research Academy in Malaysia, and the Canadian Council of Imams. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid in Chicago. Just like you, I was moved by that Allahu Akbar lady. She stood her ground, fearful of none, for her hijab and for her education. Sisters and brothers, Indian Muslims are facing a genocide. India does not care for Muslim protesting, but it does care for the world opinion. Therefore, we must push the United Nations. The UN has a responsibility to protect. They must prevent genocide. Please sign this UN petition now. Get others to sign. It will help. Trust me, it will help. We need 1 million signatures, brothers and sisters. Please sign now.
Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than and hide behind sham and whitewash investigations? When will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks? Racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime. And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table.
I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. It's time for an in-depth analysis segment. Let's watch.
More than 1 million Ukrainians have fled to Europe. And United Nations this morning is saying that the number could rise to 10 millions, 4 million to different parts of Europe and 6 million within Ukraine. So war is going on. So what the world is doing? It seems like small arms are being provided by different NATO countries to Ukraine to defend themselves against the Russian invasion. But more or less it is limited to sanctions and more sanctions and counter sanctions by Russia. Do sanctions really work? Can they bring peace? We have some question, and someone who dwells on these issues, a professor emeritus of the peace studies at the Grant Institute of International Peace Studies, George Lopez, is with us. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you today.
So, Professor, it is interesting to see there is someone who is a professor of peace studies in our country.
Well, thank you. We've been very fortunate at the Kroc Institute at Notre Dame to have generous benefactors believe that it's important to invest in research and teaching in peace. And since we opened in 1986, we have over 4,000 graduates of our program at the master's and undergraduate level, including dozens in Ukraine and Russia who we've been in touch with about this terrible tragedy.
So are there people, some of your graduates are trying to achieve peace at this moment? Because it seems like war and people supporting Ukraine with the arms and things like that. We thought United Nations, where Russia and America both are there, is an instrument of peace.
Not this time around, it seems. Unfortunate organization of the Security Council, which gives the veto to a single power when all the rest are willing to go along with the condemnation of illegal violations of borders, prevents UN Security Council action, at least at that council level. I think it's instructive that the Council did mobilize one of the few rubrics that doesn't demand full agreement of the P5 and voted to move the debate and the discussion in international law terms to the General Assembly. So on Wednesday, the General Assembly passed a resolution with 141 nations condemning Russian actions and demanding an immediate withdrawal from Ukraine. And that was a very strong action. The Secretary General has been strong about this. There are ways in which the Security Council still suffers from the design of 1945. But there are elements here that might bring peace after we can stop the fighting.
So, Professor Lopez, sanctions, pretty quickly, people are just piling up sanctions after sanctions. Do you think they will bring peace?
Well, my own hope originally weeks ago was that by being transparent in the side of the Western countries with the kinds of measures that we be imposed on Russia's leadership, its oligarchs, and its economy, that a kind of more rational choice might have been made by Mr. Putin in seeing that there might be ways to work out your concerns about Ukraine, however manufactured they may be on your side, to forego this kind of military confrontation and the economic repercussions it would have due to the sanctions. But he went ahead anyway, thinking that maybe the West wasn't as united as it has turned out to be, and thinking that they had ways in which they have evaded the worst impact of sanctions before, and he could forestall the worst of this. I think sanctions have moved from the possibility of deterring us from war and preserving peace for a while to now being the economic equivalent of making war on Russia and a way to eventually get a ceasefire. But sanctions are clearly right now in a punishment mode, not in a let us bring peace mode. I think there's some hope that the sanctions will be so immediately clear and devastating that the Russian leadership might agree to a ceasefire. But I also believe that the devastation we're seeing and the loss on both sides, most of it unanticipated on the Russian side, now create a determination in the Russian leadership that they're going to forge ahead, they're going to take over Ukraine, and then they'll worry about talk and sanctions implications later.
So, sanctions were substantial, almost complete on Iran and North Korea. But those nations survive and thrive under the sanctions. So do you think this sanction will make Russia more isolated, more self-reliant, and more arrogant?
Well, I hope not the latter, but I do think that the cases that you've mentioned are very significant in comparison to this. One of the things that makes sanctions work at its best is when the country that's being sanctioned is highly economically interdependent and integrated with the sanctioners. In North Korea, that's never been the case. North Korea already was isolated economically, and while we could control or aim to control through sanctions the export of coal, the various importation of petroleum goods, and various other things, we were always sort of nipping at the edges of actually impacting North Korea economically. What we had wanted to do was to prevent the importation of goods and other things that help them build up missiles or the nuclear weapons. Those sanctions have failed. In the case of Iran, I'd make the case that sanctions were misused in a number of ways, but even with the misuse of sanctions and the maximum pressure that pulled the United States out of the JCPOA, we're weeks away from the restoration of that agreement. In terms of the economic impact on Iran, I think most middle class and working class people in Iran did get negatively impacted in ways that the sanctions were not originally meant to do. I think anytime you have a country that has a large single export product, there's going to be ways in which the sanctions will impact negatively until they can find ways to have new purchasers of their good. And this is why the Russians and the Chinese especially were able to help Iran evade the sanctions. And these were sanctions with a big leakage. The full story is yet to be written, I think, in that case. But Russia is the case that proves the rule because of the 3,000 American companies that operate in Russia because of its substantial trade across the board in imports and exports with the West and the United States, because of the travel of Russians back and forth to the West, because the country, as a centralized run economy from the top down, has lots of exposure internationally in its financial assets and its sovereign debts. When you start closing down those bank accounts and changing the access of Russian banks to interact, to finance the goods that are now also embargoed, you take a big bite of an economy pretty clearly. The fall in the value of the ruble, the inflation in the country, the movement of the reserve rate for borrowing from 5% to 20% in 1 week, the closing of the Russian stock exchange, all of that we've seen only in the first 10 days of these sanctions. The implications for this down the road are pretty serious. And the personal has become political, and the political, by being an oligarch, has now gone personal, because the West is seizing luxury goods that they feel are ill-derived benefits of the corruption and the robbing by oligarchs of monies that should be in the state treasury and working for the country's benefit.
You know, scholars have theorized that if there is more trade, more business, it can help modify the behavior of the communist regime or post-communist regime or authoritarian regimes like Russia and China. Do you think that theory is facing some challenge at this moment?
Yeah, and I think the challenges began even in tensions between China and the West over the last few years. I do believe that the international research findings that say the greater the trading partners, the greater the interdependence, the greater the likelihood of peace, because when you attack a trading partner, in a sense, you're attacking yourself. That's also what makes sanctions so likely to be successful across interdependent economies. So there's much peace that's generated by increased cooperation and trade. The European continent of the last half of the 20th century shows that in comparison to its centuries before, when you went to a common market, when we have a Gulf Cooperative Council, when we have a Latin American Free Trade Association. All the old rivalries fade away and cooperation seems to rule the day. And there are ways in which Russia could have retained cooperation if it sought a diplomatic settlement to its worries about Ukraine. But when a dictatorial leader with massive state power chooses to go ahead and realize their ambitions under maybe some illusions about how his own country is so strong it can hold back the effect of the sanctions, then you have the situation we have here now.
Professor Lopez, something related but not quite. I mean, let me ask you about this. You know, while there is a huge amount of support for Ukraine, troubling news is coming out when African Union is condemning Ukraine, not allowing blacks to go out. Now reports are coming out about the Asians. So is it connected with the overall rise of white nationalism in Europe? Or is it something unique? A unique possibility comes to mind because, you know, Russia is accusing Ukraine of having neo-Nazis. Now it is confirmed that neo-Nazi militias are part of their army, although the president himself is a Jew. So what is the complexity regarding this race tension, which seems to have emerged as a substantial news in the last couple of days?
Yeah, I think it arose at the start as you had so many non-Ukrainian international students studying in Ukrainian universities and approaching the borders, whether it was students from India or Ethiopia or Egypt. There were initial difficulties at the Polish border, but they were corrected within 48 hours. What do they reflect? They reflect cultural prejudices that don't change overnight. It reflects much of what we saw in some sections of Europe in a resistance to Syrian refugees years ago. I think there is always a racial cultural element in a number of dynamics. But the word complexity that you use is so important because no society is homogeneous. No society that's a modern educating and travel society like Ukraine is, both in Ukrainians and the people they invite in to study, is going to produce a homogeneous kind of approach. But I think the adaptation And the attempt to get to our better universal values is prevailing in this case. And no migrant coming from Ukraine seems to be being stopped at the border now.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Lopez, for your time. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Glad to see you.
Thank you. Back to you, Hena.
That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.